Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige. I hope everybody's first 3 weeks of March were good. I don't know if you remember, but the last solo episode I did in February, I said the reason that there were 3 guest episodes at the start of March was because I was traveling for a big chunk of that first part of March. Where do you think I was traveling? Where do you think my trip was to? Dubai. When was I supposed to leave? You ask. March 3rd. When did we start bombing Iran and then Iran start bombing the other Gulf states? February 28th. Needless to say, my trip was canceled. So all that effort to source the guests and cram them all into those first 3 weeks of March was for nothing. But it was a much needed break given that Illinois elections happened on the 17th. So I got to focus on that for the most part, which was great. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But needless to say, didn't go on my trip. It's rescheduled now for October. We'll see how that pans out, but it's not looking too hot. Again, we'll get into that. But I think that's it. I've been writing on Substack a couple times a month. I just put out a piece about how Illinois needs ranked choice voting. I've written about how states need to do more to be protecting voters and putting, clear red lines in about what's going on with elections and with the midterms coming up. But yeah, I've done a lot of expanding on my ideas, and that's kind of all the updates I have. On that. It's been a weird few weeks. I'll say that much, but I'm sure we'll touch on all of it because I do plan to talk about the Illinois and Texas elections. But let's start with the biggest thing, war with Iran. I don't even know how in detail I want to get into this, but essentially on February 28th, the U.S. and Israel did joint strikes on Iran, and they took out a decent chunk of the leadership, including the Ayatollah and his wife and his son's wife and his son's kid. Like, one fell swoop. Like, they got a lot of people out of there. However, Iran then responded by bombing a bunch of Gulf states, including Qatar and Saudi Arabia and basically everybody in the area except for Oman. I had friends that were in the Middle East. I have a friend that's still in Dubai because she lives there full time. She's stuck there. So that's the thing. There's still ongoing strikes. Like, this very quickly devolved. And I think let's stay chronological. The strikes happen and everybody is like, the hell? And Trump comes out and is like, it's called Operation Epic Fury, and his announcement video where he's wearing his fuck-ass hat is him being like, addressing the Iranian people and being like, now's your time, take back your government, da-da-da-da, essentially calling for regime change. We'll get into why that's problematic in a bit, but he's calling for regime change, and then as reporters start asking him questions, they're like, is the goal regime change? And Trump and Hegseth are like, no. They don't know what the goal is. So let's start there. They don't know what the goal is. Trump's calling for regime change, but they're not saying that they're calling for regime change. So now what? What are we doing? Nothing has really been accomplished, and I believe the Israeli goals are much different than the U.S. goals. So that's a thing. Trump and Hegseth, to date, have still not been able to really articulate what the end goal is here. And JD Vance is then antagonizing the media, being like, we've already told you what the goal is. Like, we've been crystal clear on that. And same with Caroline Levitt. She's peddling that too. No, they haven't. They really have not given a coherent string of words to tell the American people what the end game is here. Trump has said anything ranging from the war will end when I feel it in my bones to the war is almost over to it could be 6 months. It's giving 2003. Is what this is giving. That Taylor Swift song where she's like, I think I've seen this film before. Yeah, that's what's going on. That is what we're seeing. Nobody knows what's going on, let alone Trump. I don't think he has any clue what's going on. Okay, my theory on everything. I think Trump thought, and I don't know why, because no piece of intelligence would have told him this. I think Trump thought he was just going to fly in, do some strikes, and then everything would be magically fixed in Iran, and he'd be like in and out within a couple of days. That, of course, is not what happened, and I don't think Trump was prepared for this to go on longer than a few days. And now they're like grasping at straws and trying to understand what went on. At this point, I'm recording this on March 20th, so we're this close to 21 days at war, but it's not a war and was never a war and can never be a war. Like, They also won't call it a war. Like, we are at war, and they won't call it a war because obviously the only person that can declare war is Congress. So they don't want to call it a war because then they'd admit that they bypassed Congress to do this crazy shit. Let's get into some of the, like, implications. I have so many thoughts on this. My background is in foreign policy, so this is my wheelhouse, I guess you could say. First of all, one of the classes that I took in my master's degree was a class about wargaming. If you don't know what wargaming is, it is where you take a situation, a hypothetical situation, or a planned situation that is coming, and you game it out. You give the potential outcomes, the probability of those outcomes, the implications of those outcomes, and that is what you present to the president or the person in charge to say, here are the benefits and risks of each of those outcomes, and based off of the different actions that you are proposing. Obviously, if Trump was saying, I'm going to bomb Iran, somebody had to be wargaming this out. My question is it that he wasn't listening to the people that were gaming this out? Were the people that are supposed to be gaming this out fired and locked out of the room because they didn't have information that Trump found, or Trump would have found, like, enthralling? I don't know. But there is no way, if this situation was wargamed out, as so many situations are, there is no way that the possibility of Iran bombing the other Gulf states did not come up, and there's no way that the probability of Iran closing and holding hostage, essentially, the Strait of Hormuz did not also come up. Those two outcomes were incredibly predictable. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how predictable both of those outcomes were. And Trump is acting as if he's hearing this information for the first time. I believe he said on Thursday the 19th something about, yeah, nobody ever mentioned that they might close the Strait of Hormuz. Hello? That is like their one area of leverage. There's no way somebody didn't tell Trump that they might close the Strait of Hormuz. That was the most obviously predictable one. As for the Gulf states, they've been saying that they were going to do that for forever and a day at this point. Like, this whole thing was so predictable. As far as, like, I don't want to say that to belittle anybody, but as far as if you know anything about foreign policy, like, this was very predictable. The people around Trump should have known this was going to happen. Then there's the part of it where, this is my opinion, Bibi Netanyahu goaded Trump into this. Because for 50 years, every single president has avoided war in Iran because they knew it was a losing battle, because they knew it wouldn't work out, because intelligence experts were telling presidents, not viable, and they listened. Trump, in my opinion, is listening to Bibi Netanyahu more than he is listening to foreign policy and intelligence experts. Period. And that's a problem. Why is Trump getting his foreign policy advice from Bibi Netanyahu? I, in fact, couldn't even tell you what the U.S. objectives are in this, but Israel's objectives, I believe, are to get the uranium out of Iran. That, however, is a boots-on-the-ground operation, which I don't think Israel wants to do on its own, which means, guess what? American boots on the ground. That's a problem. American public doesn't like that. So, don't know what that's all about. These people cannot articulate anything. They can't articulate a word about this. For a while at the beginning, Trump was like, there's going to be American boots on the ground. Like, there's going to be people that die. Like, I don't know what to tell you. What? It actually did not have to be that way at all. The other thing is that to effect regime change, history tells us that it would require American boots on the ground, which should be the one thing that any president that is waging war should be trying to avoid, is American boots on the ground, because that is majorly unpopular with the American public. Like, probably would cause some sort of revolt. So I'm not sure, again, what this grand scheme of things is. This was the one kind of foreign policy decision where I'm just stumped. Like, I don't get it. No amount of analyzing could make me understand it. I mean, I believe it is all tied into, like, the whole Venezuela, Cuba, Iran. Like, they're all tied into each other. And I'm sure there's some shady, like, backroom dealings going on, but, like, I'm just not sure what the ideal outcome looks like for him. So I can't even use what I think the intended outcome is to compare what is actually going on to. So whatever. But anyways, there's a new leader in Iran, new Ayatollah. It's the son of the original guy that was killed on the first day of the strikes. Trump says he's disfigured, allegedly. In Trump's defense, we have not seen this new Ayatollah, and his whole entire family was killed in strikes, so chances are that he was also probably injured. Perhaps. I don't know. I'm not friends with the Ayatollah. So that's the thing. The Strait of Hormuz is closed, which means that oil is down. The U.S. is spitting out hypotheticals like it's nothing. Trump's like, well, or no, it was Hegseth. Hegseth was like, well, the Strait of Hormuz is open. It's only because Iran is shooting stuff at people that it's closed. Let me translate that sentence for you. Essentially, what Pete Hegseth is saying is the Strait of Hormuz is only closed because of the thing we did that we can't take back. And it's because of our actions that we now can't control the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is closed. He danced around the fact that it is our fault that the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Gas prices are skyrocketing. I will say, typically, half a tank of gas for me is about $20. I went and filled my tank up the other weekend. It was probably a little bit more than a half tank, and it was $30. That pained me a little bit. I remember back in the day, back in COVID times, filling up my whole tank was like $25. That was nice. And here we are. So, no resolution on this. Congress is infighting. The Republicans won't call it a war because then they have to admit that Trump bypassed Congress to do the war. And that's about it. My trip was canceled. That was so awesome. I will also say, so back in June, my friend that lives in Dubai was supposed to come here. And her trip got canceled because that was when we bombed Iran the first time, when we obliterated their nuclear weapons sites. But now we're saying that we didn't do that and they still have nuclear weapons. So I don't know what that's all about. Anyways, that trip got canceled because of that bombing. Now I'm supposed to go out there. I booked this flight to go out there because her trip was canceled. I'm supposed to go out there, and now again, we bomb Iran and they start firing stuff indiscriminately, and now my trip's canceled. It's not about me, but I find it objectively funny that me seeing my friend has now been canceled twice due to Iran-U.S. Israel relations. That said, on that, situation's evolving. I'm sure we're going to end up talking about this war with Iran for weeks, if not months to come. What I think will end up happening is Trump will, at a certain point, kind of declare victory and move on. Bibi, I think, is a little bit more war hungry. Israel's firing stuff at Lebanon, which is where Hezbollah is. That's a whole thing. The U.S., I don't believe, is firing stuff in Lebanon. Not 100% sure on that. The other thing that happened was the bombing of the little girls' school in Iran, which magical things were happening on CNN after that. I'm watching it, and the woman hosting at the time had a foreign policy or national security advisor to Bibi on the show. And the national security advisor goes, no, we have evidence that Iran shot their own school. We saw it all the time in Gaza. It was Aaron Burnett that was hosting it, and it was the foreign policy advisor to Netanyahu. That's what it was. The guy is saying this, saying that Iran fired their own missile at the girls' school, and it was a misfire, and that's what they see in Gaza all the time. Aaron Burnett is staring at this man like, huh? And she literally says to him, essentially, what are you talking about? This is the first that I'm ever hearing of this. Both the Israeli and U.S. governments are full of liars, because what happened days later, we found out that it was, in fact, a U.S. missile that took out hundreds of little girls in Iran, which is a tragedy. And nobody seems to want to talk about it in the American government. So here we are. I think that's it. I'm sure I'll think of about 6 other things I could have said on this stupid war after this comes out. But in closing, this situation is messed up. It didn't need to happen. It shouldn't have happened. The Pentagon is now asking for $200 billion to further fund the war. That is insane. There are even Republicans revolting against it, including MAGA's own Lauren Boebert. Lauren Boebert's saying, no, you've got problems, Donald Trump. We will see. We will see what happens with that. Let's move on to cheerier, I guess, topics. Illinois and Texas elections. So Illinois and Texas had their primaries. There were some other states, including Mississippi and Arkansas, but those are not projected to be big Democratic wins. So we're going to gloss over those. Sorry to my friends in Arkansas and Mississippi. I love you. If there's a good Democrat, let me know. Happy to give them the spotlight, but traditionally those are not Democratic strongholds or even swing states. First up, Texas. There was a bitter fight between Jasmine Crockett and James Talarico. James Talarico ended up coming on top. And what I want to say is that I am a big believer in not your circus, not your monkeys. That is one thing my mother always told me growing up. If it is not your race, keep your mouth shut. That is not your circus, and that is not your monkeys. You can care about who wins, but I don't think that you or we or me should be advocating, especially online, for a candidate for a community that does not represent you. I understand caring about what the Democratic Party looks like as a whole, but I don't know shit about Texas, let alone who should represent them. And this is going to take a play in Illinois, too. Hold on to your butts. That was a big thing in the Texas elections. There were lots of people online that were running their mouths about a race that didn't apply to them. And then when James Tallarico won, running their mouths again about how it had to be Jasmine. I think James Tallarico was a good pick for the time and place that he is running. Texas is a swing state. There are, of course, progressives in Texas, but in my opinion, if you want a candidate to win statewide, you need somebody that has broad appeal, not just somebody that appeals to the progressives. And what's objectively funny to me is that online leftists were spouting their mouths off about AIPAC money in Illinois races and don't vote for the AIPAC money. And then in Texas, simultaneously, they were saying vote for Jasmine Crockett as she takes AIPAC money. Hard to square that circle. That's it on that. James Tallarico won. That guy, I'm not even going to say his name, that cheated on his wife with an intern that then went on to kill herself. He got roped into a runoff and then resigned, so that's fine. Dan Crenshaw, who is the congressperson with an eye patch, he lost his seat, which is crazy because Dan Crenshaw is like MAGA, and he lost his seat to an even more MAGA. Riddle me that. Crazy things happening in Texas. Then John Cornyn and Ken Paxton, they got roped into a runoff too. There was a lot of speculation about, are one of them going to drop out? Who's going to get Trump's endorsement? Trump has so far not weighed in, which is very interesting. Paxton kind of represents like the new guard of MAGA. Cornyn is more like old guard. He's been pretty much on Trump's side, but like I think Trump probably views him as somewhat like unreliable, and I mean, you know how Trump is. Those are the big things in Texas. Overall, I wish the best for James Tallarico. I think he has a very unique and interesting chance at potentially winning the Senate seat. If Democrats want to take back the Senate, they're going to need to expand the map, and I think Texas might be the place that they end up doing that, which is crazy. But we will see. On to Illinois elections, which took place this past Tuesday. If you're from the area, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you're not from the area, there's been some chaos. But what I want to start out with is that a lot of the chatter online is framing the Illinois elections as progressive losses. But I don't like to see it that way. Maybe that is a choice that I'm subconsciously making, but the results of Tuesday's elections showed progressive gains in a lot of places. First of all, AIPAC invested in 4 congressional races. They won 2 of those races. Meta invested in 4 state house races. They won 1 of those races. In Illinois 13 and Illinois 5, Nikki Budzinski and Mike Quigley were running. They are the incumbents. They are fairly moderate. And their challengers, Dylan Blaha in Illinois 13 and Matt Conroy in Illinois 5, got 25% of the vote share. In Matt Conroy's case, he was running a campaign with 3 people on it. I believe it's him, his wife, and a third person. Less than $20,000 in donations, and he scrounged up 25% of the vote share. That is a win, if I've ever seen one. In terms of progressives. In the Senate race, Kevin Ryan, who I had on this podcast, was running the only grassroots campaign. Like, I'm talking small dollar donations, riding around the state on a bus. He was the only candidate to go to all 102 counties. He got 60,000 votes in a statewide race and outperformed his own polling numbers. That is a win. Now, on to the big things. And I have a couple. I did a live this past week with Chelsea Lyle Birthday Barnes. That is up on my Instagram right now, talking like more in depth about all the races. And I'm doing another one with Ishan on Saturday that I'm sure will also be up. But in terms of more specifics, in Illinois 9, Danielle Biss won. Not that surprised about that. I caught a lot of flack online for not supporting Kat Abugzaleh, and suspiciously, after she lost, nobody wants to tell me to kill myself anymore. Send me my phone number. So don't know what that was all about. Not to be a conspiracy theorist, but that was weird. That was a weird couple days for me right up before the election, because I said I wasn't voting for Kat and that it was irresponsible of her to say that influencers are being paid to be against me, but then not have the caveat that it's not all influencers. Because then people are coming to my videos and being like, how's that $1,500? I don't know. I wish I had it. Anyways, that was a whole thing. Daniel Biss won, and I think that's very predictable. I don't think Illinois 9 is a race where somebody can just swoop in. Some people, you know what? I'll say it. Small plates, IG, whoever the hell that is, and that Megan Tui, Megan Thuy, they keep trying to make this into like a race thing, but Kat, it's not like she was active with voters of color at all. At a certain point, they were also saying carpetbagger is a racist term. No, it's not. It had nothing to do with race. It had to do with every single person that came from the North looking for opportunity off the backs of the destruction of the South. Nothing to do with race. That's a whole thing. Kat did not actively engage the community. I believe she was endorsed by one singular local organization. She basically swept the floor with like all of the national orgs, but could not pick up steam in terms of local orgs and getting people behind her. She came close enough, but I also don't think she cares about this community. Her mutual aid hub that she spoke about every third word is not open today, suspiciously. Weird. I feel like if you cared about the community, you'd keep something like that open, but who am I to judge? But Daniel Biss won. He'll be fine. He's not, I didn't vote for him. He's not my favorite candidate, but he'll do fine. I think. I hope. Most important thing, though, is that the AIPAC candidate in that race, Laura Fine, lost. So good on that. The other one is Melissa Conyers-Irvin, who was running in 7. She also lost. And LaShawn Ford won. Was an amazing state representative for a long time, so I'm very happy that it was LaShawn that won. Comptroller was another messy race. Margaret Croak, I believe, came out on top. She's, if you could see my face right now, very establishment, very moderate, Nepo baby. Nepo baby to end all Nepo babies. I got a bone to pick with her, but that's okay. Karina Villa, who was the progressive candidate, she came in a pretty close second, so that's, again, another progressive win. And then the other one was the Senate race. Juliana Stratton won. Again, I didn't vote for her. I voted for Kevin Ryan, but I'm relieved. I'm relieved that Raja Krishnamurthy is not going to be the next senator from Illinois. So Raja Krishnamurthy's $33 million war chest did jack for him. And that's a good thing. That's another win. Even though, like I said, Juliana Stratton was not my favorite. I think she'll do a good job. And I think she's more of a fighter than Dick Durbin was. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll know that I also have a bone to pick with Dick Durbin, despite the fact that I worked for him. I constantly am like, do I have to take that off my resume now? Anyways, I'm also honored to say that the campaign, I was volunteering for Patrick Hanley, who was also on this podcast back in November, I believe. I was volunteering for him, and he did eke out a win with about 1,000 votes, which just goes to show you that every single vote counts. And part of the reason that I'm so proud of that campaign is that he won despite the fact that his opponent received a $73,000 check from the Jewish Caucus PAC in Illinois, which is insane. He beat back a $73,000 check by just organizing and being a good communicator. Crazy. So those are the progressive wins in Illinois. So I'm sick of people saying, AIPAC won in Illinois. Okay, they won 2 races. And you know what lost in Illinois? In a lot of cases, big money. Progressives made massive strides. Stop having this loser mentality. The only people that lost in Illinois were corporate interests, for the most part. AIPAC lost in half the cases. Meta lost in 3 out of 4 cases. Nick Angiewski, who was running to unseat Sarah Feigenholtz, walked away with 44% of the votes. That's crazy. Stop framing these as losses. This, to me, shows us that we are moving in the right direction. People are sick of big money. People are sick of outside influence. Tuesday was a big win in Illinois for people that want to move beyond this. And it's time that we stop acting like a bunch of losers. Anyways, in anti-vax news, a judge's ruling has halted the momentum on RFK Jr.'s vaccine agenda, which is great news for public health. What the judge did was essentially halt a lot of the kind of sweeping changes to vaccine policy that RFK Jr. had instituted, including the firing of 17 people on the Vaccine Advisory Committee, which was horrifying to pediatricians everywhere, and also the changes that he did a while ago about the childhood vaccine schedule, which is a whole nother Maha conspiracy theory. Whatever. Obviously, the ruling is not final. RFK Jr. has said himself that they look forward to it being overturned. Shut up. Be normal. Anyways, I don't think I need to say much on this, except for the fact that it's a joy. I am overjoyed that somebody is putting a stop to some of RFK Jr.'s nonsense, because I think what's most concerning about the rollbacks in vaccines and medical research and like that whole arena, those effects aren't going to be seen for like years down the line. Whereas a lot of the other stuff Trump is doing can be seen somewhat immediately. So anything that is done to alter how much harm is done in like the health sector is a win in my book, given, like I said, the fact that we won't see these implications for 5-10 years. So more to come on that. Hopefully the order stays, intact and RFK Jr. stops being a little freak. In terms of other health updates, Susie Wiles announced she has breast cancer, essentially said that it was nothing to worry about. She's still going to maintain her position as chief of staff, which is great. She sometimes seems to be a voice of reason. I did also read an article about how she was, I think it was Wall Street Journal. She's the one that is like, we need to stop the craziness with the detention camps and like we're going too far on immigration policy. So she does sometimes seem to be the voice of reason. So I'm a little bit relieved that she's sticking around because things could be worse in terms of having a chief of staff. The other one, which is slightly more unhinged, is that Congressman Neil Dunn of Florida had some sort of terminal illness, but the gag was that nobody knew that, and it didn't seem like anybody was supposed to know that. He announced his retirement, so he's not running for office again. But at a press conference of some sort, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, and Donald Trump were sitting there, and Trump starts running his mouth off. Here's the exchange. So this is Trump speaking, direct quote. "But we're looking very strong. We had one man who was very ill, looked like he wasn't going to make it. I won't mention his name. Should I? Do other people know his name? He'll be proud. Do you want me to mention his name? Go ahead. Tell them the story." Johnson then says he, quote, had some real health challenges. It was very serious. He had a pretty grim diagnosis, and then added that he thinks it was a terminal diagnosis. And they're talking about how this like surgery essentially saved him. Trump then jumps in and goes, quote, "He would be dead by June." Obviously, the room goes silent. Johnson then goes, "Okay, that wasn't public, but okay, it was grim. That's what I was going to say." None of this is funny, except for the fact that Trump can't keep his mouth shut. Prayers up to Neil Dunn, who is apparently surviving this and is going to live past June. Why is Donald Trump spewing his personal medical information in front of the press? That was weird. Mike Johnson actually made me giggle, though, when he was like, that was not public. I can't. Let's move on to Cuba. So their electric grid failed because you're asking why. Trump said Venezuela can't send them oil. That is apparently where a lot of their oil comes from, as well as through the Strait of Hormuz, which is closed, as we spoke about. So their electric grid failed. And then Trump has been talking about for weeks about how he's going to take them over and whatever. My goal is to have somebody on that's able to better articulate that. I'm not well versed in Cuba policy. All that to say, I believe that like I said at the top, I think all of these things are connected. Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran. And this is a really good example of that. Trump has, even before the Venezuela stuff happened in January, Trump had been talking about taking Cuba and being weird about Cuba for a while. And I think having Venezuela and Iran are two pressure points in being able to do that, because Cuba is very dependent on oil from other countries. I think this is just, again, perhaps I'm getting conspiratorial, but I believe this is just Trump knocking down more of the dominoes until he can take actions against Cuba, which is crazy. Does nobody remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? Does nobody remember Bay of Pigs? Are we not listening to the lessons learned from foreign policy mistakes? The hell was that? What are we doing? So we will see how this evolves, but for now, Cuba is lacking in electricity, and Trump has his eyes on it. He's monitoring the situation, if you will. So, great. Nice to have a well-rounded, totally normal person keeping their eyes on this as it evolves. Back to domestics. We are currently in a partial government shutdown that hasn't been talked about much, but now it's starting to pick up traction because TSA lines are long as hell. Back when ICE was shooting people indiscriminately, shooting U.S. citizens, people for protesting, Democrats shut down the government over funding DHS. And because of that, TSA is part of DHS. Both, again, miraculous things happening on CNN. The other weekend, they had a Republican congressperson and then a Democratic congressperson. First, the Democratic congressperson got on and they were like, we want to fund TSA. Like, we've put a bill on the table. Republicans just keep rejecting it. And then the Republican got on CNN and was like, we want to fund TSA. The Democrats just keep rejecting it. And again, the host of the hour was like, sir, your colleague from across the aisle just got on here and said they were doing the same thing. So, like, what are we doing? What's the truth? What I believe is going on here is Democrats are putting bills on the table to fund it. Republicans are rejecting them. And they're now trying to claim that it's the same thing. And they keep pointing to the fact that, oh, Democrats are asking for too much in terms of ICE reforms, like blah, blah, blah. It is very much about ICE. But I think what Republicans are doing is they're continuing not to fund TSA because this is the part where they can make it hurt for the everyday person. This is the part where people will be, directly affected and see the 2-hour, sometimes 3 and 4 hour long TSA lines and feel the pinch and try to put pressure on the Democrats to fix it. Given the track record of Democrats and government shutdowns, I think they fold. I don't know when, but I think Democrats will eventually fold. Because the minute things started to get a little bit hot in the last full government shutdown, Democrats caved within minutes. So we'll see about that. But keep in mind, we are in a partial government shutdown. And if you are traveling, probably a good idea to get there at least a little bit early and see what the situation is, especially with spring break coming up. Or maybe you're in it right now. Who knows? Going back to Iran now, the head of the National Counterterrorism Center announced his resignation. His name was Joe Kent. And guess what it was over? The war in Iran. Remember when I said that any good intelligence person would tell you that this wasn't a good idea? Joe Kent agreed. Joe Kent agreed and said, I'm done. He posted his resignation on Twitter. Well, not just Twitter. I'm sure it got sent through the official channels, but then he posted it on Twitter. And it reads, I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. I support the values and the foreign policy that you campaigned on in 2016, 2020, and 2024, which you enacted in your first term. Until June of 2025, you understood that the wars in the Middle East were a trap that robbed America of the precious lives of our patriots and depleted the wealth and prosperity of our nation. He then goes on to say, early in this administration, high-ranking Israeli officials and influential members of the American media deployed a misinformation campaign that wholly undermined your America First platform and sowed pro-war sentiments to encourage a war with Iran. This echo chamber was used to deceive you into believing that Iran posed an imminent threat to the United States and that should you strike now, there was a clear path to swift victory. This was a lie and is the same tactic the Israelis used to draw us into the disastrous Iraq war that cost our nation the lives of thousands of our best men and women. We cannot make this mistake again. I want you to know that that was my first time actually reading his resignation. I think I kind of ate with my analysis at the top. Is that not what I said too? That was pretty good. Somebody better give me a pat on the back for that. Anyways, very telling that this guy is saying he supports Donald Trump and likes his foreign policy and is saying, you were tricked. You have been tricked. Seems like everybody else knows that except for Trump himself. And I wouldn't be surprised if Republicans are saying that behind closed doors. Because they love to shit on him when he's not in the room. Yeah. That was a big one. That was big breaking news when it happened. Again, I think because he so plainly spelled it out of you have been deceived. And in general, I should have said this at the top, Iran war portion, but this to me just shows how easily deceived Donald Trump is. And we know based on books from people that previously worked in his administration, he loves a picture. He does not like to read. He is so easily tricked. If you show him the right picture and you say the right words, you can get him to do what you want, which is crazy because I believe some part of him is also a master manipulator, but he also is easily manipulated. So it's a little hard to square that circle for me, but whatever. Anyways, so now we have no National Counterterrorism Center head. My guess is that he'll be replaced with somebody just as crazy as everybody else in the administration. So don't know if that's a good thing. I get torn a lot when good people resign. I have friends that are federal workers that are I want to resign, I want to leave. And I'm please stay. Because chances are if you leave, you're going to be replaced by somebody that objectively sucks. But I understand how miserable it is to be in the federal government. So if I could deliver any message to any federal worker, it would be, please keep going. Because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know where it is. I don't know who's taking the form of that light, but there is one. and we need good people in the government right now. Last topic. Kristi Noem had a bad day. So, Kristi Noem got in front of Congress. Well, first of all, let's start with the actual kind of headline. Kristi Noem was fired. And you're asking yourself, why? Not because Americans got murdered, not because of, anything egregious like that. It was because of her $200 million ad campaign. So Kristi Noem got in front of Congress and had to testify, and Senator Kennedy, a Republican from Louisiana, started asking her about this ad campaign. Then it came out that he had told Trump, I'm going to go hard on her. Like, why are we seeking approval for asking hard questions? Not even hard questions, necessary questions. Anyways, Kennedy asked her about the hundreds of millions dollar ad campaign and was like, did Trump know about it? And Kristi was like, yes, he did. Trump was like, no, I didn't. In fact, I thought the ads were weird. That was what got her fired. It was because Trump was sick of seeing her on TV. Then there was the bombshell Wall Street Journal report that I think I talked about in my last solo episode about the Corey Lewandowski wanting a gun and a badge and them having an affair and the approval process for contracts, all that stuff. Under oath, somebody asked her if she's ever slept with Corey Lewandowski. She's like, how dare you ask me that question? That is just fodder. That is tabloid fodder, blah, 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 blah. First of all, it's the Wall Street Journal. It's not a tabloid. Second of all, never once did the words no come out of her mouth. So she was then reassigned to some sanctity of the Americas position, essentially some made up position that Trump gave her, which is not surprising because Trump refuses to fire anybody given how tumultuous his first administration was, where somebody was being fired every 2 weeks. So he just keeps shuffling people around to shittier and shittier positions, which is funny. Currently, Markwayne Mullin is going through the process to be nominated. Guess who voted to let him through? John Fetterman. I know I just spent some time preaching about keeping your mouth shut if it's not your race. John Fetterman has got to go. I'm sorry. That man was elected as a progressive. He was elected as a progressive, and he has turned into a Republican in Democrat clothing. What are we doing? Mark Wayne, and that is his full legal name. It's not Mark and it's not Wayne, it's Mark Wayne. Mark Wayne now advances to the Senate for the full confirmation hearing. So we will see how that goes for him. Best of luck to that guy. He seems to be... He did try to... Look this one up. He did try to fight a witness. Stood up and took his rings off on the floor of the Senate. He also does not have a college degree. He doesn't have any degrees, I don't believe. Not to be a snob about education, but you're leading an entire come on. Let's be serious for a minute. So we'll see about that. But Kristi Noem is gone, and that is objectively a good thing. Will her replacement be any better? I don't know. I don't really know enough about Markwayne Mullin except for the fact that he was a former MMA fighter. Again, the most unqualified people in these positions, but that is wholly not shocking. But we'll see how the cookie crumbles. Anyways, that is all that I have for this week. And I will be back next week with an episode from the ladies of Pink Poster Club, which is a local advocacy organization here in the Chicagoland area. And we're going to chat about what it's like to do local advocacy. And hopefully you guys will all be inspired to start your own Pink Poster Clubs. But yeah, that is it. We are off the candidate episodes until May, I believe, which is fun. It's a little break from that. Normal people only for a little bit. As much as I love talking to candidates, it's also nice to talk to cool people that are doing cool things. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone who could use this information. To support this podcast, you can also subscribe to my Substack, She Knows the Score, linked in the show notes. And as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and remember not to listen to Israeli propaganda. I will see you guys next week.